All right, you ready for the ultimate easy street in ethics? Then you are ready for the theory of emotivism. And actually, it's probably not appropriate to use the term theory when talking about any of these relativistic approaches to ethics that we're exploring, because none of them offers any kind of framework that we could use to talk about morality and talk about moral dilemmas and how to address conflicts. None of them even offer any kind of approach to conflict or any kind of approach to considering others in our decision making and in the actions we take. But instead, they seem to just describe or make claims about the nature of morality and what the implication would then be for people who are approaching conflict or approaching and addressing moral dilemmas. All right, so emotivism. It doesn't really have a formal argument in support of it. Instead, it relies on just a series of claims being true and then what that would sort of imply about morality for people who adhere to emotivism or embrace. There's nothing to adhere to. Embrace emotivism. So the first claim of emotivism is that morality is non-cognitive. Okay, now this can be kind of a weird idea to try to get our heads wrapped around. What they mean is that even though it seems like you and I have debates or discussions about what the right thing to do is, and we have arguments about whether or not something was ethical or morally permissible, the emotivist says we're kind of missing what morality really is because we're trying to make it into something that can be thought about logically, something that can be talked about logically. When in reality, the emotivist says, what we think of as moral claims, these are just expressions of our internal emotional states and reactions to things, right? So that when I say, I think that harming puppies for fun is immoral, I'm really just saying, ew, I don't like that. I'm just reporting my reaction to it. So the moral claim is really the equivalent of like saying, ouch, when you stub your toe, right? Ouch doesn't mean anything. Logically, it just is an indication that I'm having some experience internally of pain that I'm now verbalizing. And because moral claims are simply statements like ouch, the emotivist says that moral claims are neither true nor false. Just like ouch isn't true or false. When I say something like abortion is morally permissible or murder is wrong, those are statements that appear to be true or false, but according to the emotivists, they're actually not. They're just expressions of these internal states. So when I say abortion is immoral or murder is immoral, I'm really just saying, ugh, I don't like that. That's all I'm really saying according to the emotivist. And then the corollary would also be true, right? That when I say like, wow, you did such a good thing when you risked your safety to save that drowning baby. What the emotivist would say is like, well, none of that really has any meaning. You're just using these words as a way of saying like, yay, I really like what you did. Okay. Now, because moral claims are neither true nor false, and because morality is non-cognitive and simply an expression of feeling, the emotivist draws the conclusion that an individual's feelings are actually the right and wrong making feature of actions. But again, this is really sort of outside the realm of cognition. So the terms right and wrong don't even have a lot of meaning here. We're really just, what the emotivist is saying is when you hear these things that people identify as moral claims, you can't interpret them as statements about something outside the person. They're simply reports of what's going on inside the person. Just like I said, that proclaiming ouch or yay, that these are just reports of what's going on inside an individual person. Now you can imagine there's probably questions that folks are going to raise about all of these claims, including the conclusion, right? They're going to say, look, how can you say morality is non-cognitive? We clearly apply the rules of logic, and we use language, and we have discussions that involve evidence, and we evaluate the arguments that people are making about some moral issue or conflict and how to address it. And we evaluate all of this not with our feelings, but with our brains and our rationality. So they're going to say, of course, morality is cognitive. It's not an illusion that it's cognitive. And that means, they would say, that moral claims, just like all claims, are either true or false, right? Yes, statements, or not even statements, exclamations like ouch or yay, those aren't true or false, right? But moral claims are statements, and all statements are either true or false. So the opponent of the emotivist is going to say, this claim you're making about moral claims not being true or false is just an illogical claim. When somebody makes a claim like abortion is morally permissible, that's a claim that we have to evaluate by some criteria as being either true or false. And of course, they're going to tackle the third statement here, that moral claims are not simply emotional expressions of emotional states. They're not the same thing as ouch or yay. These are claims about something external to the person. They're claims about the quality of an action that either that person or somebody else is taking. So it's something outside this person. And they're going to argue with this conclusion and say, this statement, in fact, the conclusion doesn't even make a whole lot of sense, because the right and wrong are concepts that apply to cognition, right? They apply to thoughts. Is that thought about this action, is it right or wrong? But if it's true that these that moral claims are just expressions of internal subjective emotion, then right and wrong doesn't really even apply to those terms. And so you can kind of see with emotivism, morality kind of crumbles away, right? It's hard to even think of emotivism as any kind of moral or ethical theory. And we can see how emotivism really starts to have kind of problems as an approach to ethics if we look at some of the fundamental assumptions of this belief system. Are feelings reliable? The emotivist is saying that we should be sort of taking seriously the emotional reactions that we have to events to evaluate whether or not those actions were moral or not. Well, are feelings reliable? Are feelings easy to manipulate? When you experience guilt, is that always an indication that you've done something wrong? Or is it possible that you could feel guilty for something that you really shouldn't feel guilty about? And would the reverse also be true? If you don't feel guilty about something, does that mean that what you did was morally permissible? Does that mean that every psychopath and sociopath is doing things that are perfectly morally permissible because they don't experience guilt in response to their own behavior? And is empathy always good? Right? So you can see this kind of reliance on emotivism, and an emotivist would say, look, when I have empathy or sympathy for others, this emotional sort of connection to this other person, this is what's going to allow me to navigate my conflicts with this other person effectively, because I'm going to be sort of feeling for them or feeling with them. But there's a pretty good case to be made that empathy is really not good in ethics. And you might take a look at this book by Paul Bloom called Against Empathy. I think he's a psychologist or a social psychologist. But he makes a pretty good argument with lots of evidence that despite how much we talk about the need for empathy, particularly in our political leaders these days, empathy can be very, very destructive to ethics. One of the examples he gives is something like this. They did the study, they bring in groups of people, and they give these groups of people a dilemma. And the dilemma is something like this. You give $10 million. You can donate it to this organization that's going to give a vaccine that prevents malaria to 100,000 children who would otherwise die from malaria, or you can donate it to this little child's cancer cure fund and cure this little kid's cancer. And when they're just given the information like that, and they have to assess what's the right thing to do with this $10 million, and they can't split it up between the two, they inevitably go, well, this sucks for the little kid that's going to die of cancer, but clearly if I can save 100,000 children, that's probably more morally defensible than saving the one and allowing 100,000 to die. But then they'll show some groups a video of the little child, right, being cute and playing. And if the groups that got shown the video made the opposite choice about what to do with that $10 million. And so Bloom's case is that feeling isn't necessarily a reliable guide to figuring out what the right thing to do is. We really should be relying on our cognition and evaluating evidence and thinking rationally about what to do. All right, so going back to our little ethical framework structure thing here, you can see an emotivist is going to make a moral claim. I think that it was wrong I think it was morally permissible to give the money to the little girl who has cancer rather than the kids who are going to get malaria. Okay, there's a moral claim. And the reason? Because that's the way I feel. My heart tugs when I see this little girl who has the cancer that can be cured. And what matters most is sort of relying on my feelings, what my sort of gut tells me, what I'm emotionally experiencing is the thing I got to pay the most attention to. That's the thing that's going to guide me in my quote unquote ethical decision making, even though it's not really ethical, it's just feelings.